This audio podcast is available on YouTube, Apple and Google Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, etc. Or you can add an RSS feed to a podcast player or download the MP3 file from my website. Links for all will be included in the description for each episode. If you're listening to the podcast, for example, via Apple Podcasts, a rating and a review would be appreciated. And on YouTube, subscribe to my channel and click the notification bell icon. And likes are always welcome, as are any comments or questions you may have. Sharing the podcast also helps, and of course, liking, subscribing, following and sharing when checking out any links included for each guest. And please forgive any audio issues which occurred during the recording of this episode. I was in such awe of this week's guest, I guess I didn't notice. Improvements, as always, are a constant work in progress. Thank you.
Cheers. Although, if people don't like, they're going straight down into Davy Jones's locker, so they better click the like button.
Hello and welcome to the Sim Racing Perspectives podcast for Wednesday, the 6th of November 2019. I'm your host, Davy Jones, and I'm delighted today to be joined by racing driver and sim driver David Perel. Hello, David.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, David.
You're welcome, and thank you again for joining. Now, David, I had some notes here that I would like to use as a basis for this conversation, and you are somebody I've been kind of following for a while and somebody I was looking to get on the show.
Thank you. Awesome.
And indeed, recently you did a podcast with Zach Hodgson of Turn Racing, and before we begin, I would encourage listeners to perhaps pause this episode and go and listen to your conversation with Zach, and then maybe come back and continue with this one, because in a way I wanted this conversation to be a sort of a continuation of sorts of your conversation with Zach, or take elements from it. And you come across to me as a very humble, capable guy, which I respect deeply. And Zach is somebody who was also doing everything himself, and I would encourage people to go and check out the podcast and go and check out Zach's channel. I mean, there's a video of Zach on his channel building a Ferrari 488 GTE wheel out of carbon fibre, doing all the milling, making all the electronics himself and the hand grips. And not only that does he do everything himself, he does all his marketing and everything. He recently announced on Twitter that with his church group, he was taking a week in Mexico to volunteer at an orphanage.
Yeah, Zach is a fantastic guy. Awesome.
Zach is amazing. So I just wanted to add that note. So David, you're from Cape Town, South Africa, and you're in London today. And I wanted to talk about, now, you mentioned that you had been in Portugal recently, driving for the Euro Le Mans series in the Ferraris. So was that testing pre-season, or what was it exactly?
So the European Le Mans series is a championship organized by the same people who sort of own and run the 24 hours of Le Mans. So I think back in the day, you just used to have Le Mans, and prior to that, the GT and prototype teams would have to find individual races to try and fill the calendar before Le Mans preparation.
Yes.
So now they have this European Le Mans Championship, and the winner in each category, LMP2, LMP3, GTE, get an invite to the Le Mans grid. So you can't just phone up Le Mans one day and say, I want to enter. You have to earn your entry on that grid.
Okay.
And winning the ELMS Championship is one of those things. So I was racing for a team called Kessel Racing, which I started my GT3 career in. It's Kessel Racing / Iron Lynx. And their regular driver, one of their regular drivers, because you need 3 drivers in the car, he decided to step out of the car for the remainder of the season, which opened up an opportunity for me to race with the team. So I was doing the final round of the ELMS Championship with Kessel and Iron Lynx in the GTE category.
Yes, and that's in the Ferrari 488 GTE, I guess.
Yes, which is similar but different to the GT3.
Indeed, because they race in both categories. And you recently published an onboarding story You recently published an onboard story video from Vallelunga, and that was in preparation for the Nations Cup and the Italian GT Championship. That was a recording from September 2 months ago. And you got podium there, was it so?
Yeah, we had a really, really good race. I managed to get pole position, which was very satisfying because qualifying is something I've always struggled with. I do occasionally do a good lap, and I'm happy that I managed to do one this time. And then in the race, we played quite a conservative strategy, and it ended up being the right strategy because we won our class and finished third overall. So very happy with that. And yeah, I mean, we got to share the track with two former Formula One drivers, which is really cool. And yeah, it was a fun race. Frustrating from my stint because I couldn't overtake the guy.
I saw that. I saw that indeed. Yeah, and I'll link to the video. Excuse me. I'll link to the video directly in the podcast description. And indeed, you were racing behind Jacques Villeneuve and Giancarlo Fisichella, which was fascinating. Now we'll move on. I wanted to kind of talk about your career and then the different seasons, and then we'll go via topic if we can. I'll refer to my notes. I've done a bit of homework here so I don't forget anything. So basically, you're currently racing in silver class in Pro-Am.
So yeah, okay. So it's a bit complicated because the GT World Challenge is complicated. They have two championships really. Well, they have three, but it's the first one is the Sprint Championship, which is called the GT World Challenge Europe. And in that championship, we were racing in the Pro-Am category. And
yes.
The Pro-Am category requires one bronze driver, one pro driver. So my teammate Rinaldi, he was the bronze and I was the pro.
Okay.
However, in the Endurance Championship, which this year was called Blancpain GT Endurance, we were competing in the Silver Cup category. And that requires 3 drivers of a maximum rating of silver. So you can have a bronze in the car. And in this case, Rinaldi was our bronze driver, but he's so quick that we took the risk to enter in the Silver Cup. So both championships, the GT World Challenge and the Blancpain GT, fall under the SRO organization, Stefan Vettel organization. And it's basically, that's where GT3 racing comes from. He kind of invented the category, which you see now in America as GTD. You see the GTEs in Le Mans and stuff. But it was Stefan Vettel who kind of brought GT racing to the front. And yeah, I've been competing in that championship for 3 years now. So this year was endurance and sprint. Last year I did some one-off races, but yeah, we had a tough season in Blancpain. Luckily, the second half of the season we started to get some results, but overall it was pretty difficult.
Yeah, very competitive. And Stefan Vettel, he was a driver himself back in the day, wasn't he?
I believe so, but more a gentleman driver, more from amateur angle. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, I have here that you started with Gran Turismo 1 at the age of 13, and at the time you thought you could use it to become a racing driver, and you continue to use it to make yourself a better driver on an ongoing basis. And also that you used to go to the Ferrari dealership in Cape Town to stare at the cars, which I can appreciate. And this is something you mentioned when you were talking with Zach on the Turn podcast. And then you also told the story of before your 21st birthday, you had the option of a karting race in Italy and you needed €6,000 to join. But your dad said, okay, well, I'll provide the flight and if you go and be a mechanic. And then you talked about on the last day you went to Fiorano and you stood on the bridge overlooking a racetrack and watching F1 testing. And that was a kind of a precursor to what was to become, wasn't it so?
Yeah, I still think of that story relatively often because I find it quite surreal.
Yeah,
I was meant to do that karting race. In the end, I couldn't find the €6,000, but my dad he paid for my flight to go be a mechanic for the team I was meant to race for. And then on the last day, we went to Fiorano and we stood on it. There's a bridge there where you can see. I can't remember exactly which turn, but if you stand on the bridge, you can see the track, parts of the track, and there was a Formula One car going around. I didn't really have grand ambitions of getting to F1 by that point. My dad gave me a huge reality check when I was 18 years old and said, there's no chance for you, son. you don't have the money. And at the time, I wasn't doing very well in karting. So he's like, you probably don't have the talent either to get to F1. And he was right. But I still loved F1. I still loved
Yeah.
racing, and I was hungry enough to keep going. I was stupid enough to ignore his advice. So yeah, many years later, I was the most successful Ferrari GT driver in the world in 2017. And I found myself inside the Fiorano racetrack receiving awards for that feat. So that was ridiculous, frankly. It was pretty ridiculous, but it's still cool. I hope I appreciate it when I'm older.
To get that far based on where you had become. And then you noted that you quit karting at 23, and I think if I looked it up, you were 6th in the world in Rotax Max Challenge in senior class, was it so?
Yeah.
And then you decided to work flat out on your business to make enough money to come back. Now, I want to talk about what you do on your kind of personal business level later on. And then I also noticed on your driver DB profile, there's a reference to a 2008 Formula Volkswagen in South Africa. What was that?
Yeah, so just before I quit racing entirely, after I finished 6th in the Rotax Max World Finals, with my karting mentor, Claudio Piazzamusso, together we haggled our way into a Formula car. There was this new series in South Africa called Formula Volkswagen. I forget the chassis, but basically these chassis had come from Germany, where there was some single-seater racing there. And then with the South African organizers put Volkswagen rally engines in the cars, 250 horsepower, 2-liter engines.
Yeah.
Sounded incredible. And I raced those for 3 races, but in South Africa, we can't cope because of our currency. The expenses to run carbon-based cars is it's just too much. And in 3 of the races, I damaged the front wing, either in practice or in the race itself. One of them was my fault. The other 2, I was involved in accidents I couldn't avoid. But that alone equated to about 80,000 Rand, which is a deposit on a house. So the team said, sorry, bud, you're out. So I did 3 or 4 races in the formulas, but that's when I quit. I quit after they kicked me out the team. So, at the time I didn't really understand everything because I was very fast. I was racing against, I was in the top 3 or 4 in every race, competing against guys who'd tested A1 GP cars and GP2 cars. And I just didn't understand why you wouldn't keep me on, but after stopping Formula, I realized that racing, to get in, you need money, and you have to accept that is table stakes. And it has nothing to do with talent, because everyone in racing who's made it actually is very talented. Even the guys who paid their way there. The truth is everyone paid their way there, but some of them got it from their family, which good for them. And some of them, got it from business or from being able to find sponsors. So I said to myself, I have to do one of those 3 things. My family isn't going to give me the money. So I said, okay, let me put the dedication that I put into racing, let me put that into my business with my brother, who is my co-founder. He was also incredibly dedicated. And that's when I decided to stop. And I stopped properly. I didn't visit racetracks. I didn't log on to autosport.com, which I'm incredibly addicted to. Racing was no longer a thing for me. However, it was a thing in that I knew I was going to come back, but I didn't want to be drawn into it too early. So I kind of switched off.
And then later you came back then as a gentleman driver, paying your way to race basically. You still had the dream of being a factory driver for Ferrari at some point, and also maybe racing at Le Mans, which you've been competing for.
Yeah.
And of course, based on your achievements so far, it's kind of Le Mans like a cherry on top at this point. So then you competed in the 2014 Super Trofeo finals in a Lamborghini.
Yes.
And then you found the team that needed a bronze driver in 2015, and the team called you, and then you got to race the Italian GT in 2015. So then how did you come from deciding to kind of pull back and quit a little, and then up to 2014, 2015, becoming a gentleman driver to pay your way. Now, obviously, you had decided to pull back and work hard on your business to make some money to
afford it.
Yeah, to afford it. But talk us through that process.
Yeah, it wasn't a linear process. It was kind of hacked together, but I knew. Okay, when I was working on my business, I would wake up every morning and think to myself, I can't believe you're not a racing driver. You know, I distinctly remember staring at the ceiling a few times and going, this is unbelievable that I work on computers. I was pretty good at that, but that was never my dream. And I would say when I was in high school, I said, the one thing I'm never going to do is work behind a desk. And that's kind of what I found myself doing. And I loved my business. I loved working with my brother a lot. We have a very, very good relationship, but I still had this fire in me that I had to try to become a racing driver. I felt I was good enough, maybe not the best, but good enough. So I was saving money. Not in a special account or anything, but from the business side and from the personal side, I had enough money to do something if I one day pulled the trigger. So I think in 2012, I read about this karting race called the African Open, and the winner of the African Open would get a ticket to the Rotax Max World Finals. Now, I finished 6th in 2007, but I should have won it. That's my opinion still to this day. I should have. I made a small mistake and dropped from the top 3. I dropped to P9 and then fought my way back to 6th. So I made a mistake, and I never kind of forgave myself for that. So I said to myself, okay, I need to let me give this one more shot. Okay, this time when I come back to racing, it's going to be my own money. It's going to be, I'm going to have, in karting terms, a relatively unlimited budget in karting terms. And I'm going to throw everything I can at this one-off race. So overall, in terms of spending money for a season, it was much cheaper. And in the end, I mean, in today's money, I spent less than £5,000 to do this race. But in South Africa, that's a monstrous amount of money. In the UK, it is a lot of money, but you can find a way. And I'd fly to the track. It wasn't in Cape Town where I lived. It was 2,000 kilometers away in Durban. I'd fly there every weekend. I rented all the equipment. I had a good team. And when I got to the final, the African Open final, I had to start last because we had a problem in the pre-final, and I ended up finishing 2nd. So I fought my way through the pack and finished 2nd. So I didn't get the ticket. But in that moment, I proved to myself that there was still something there. I mean, keep in mind, prior to that 2012 race, I didn't go near a racetrack. So I proved to myself that I still had the ability to race and compete. So I continued doing the one-off race. Then 2013, I did it again. I finished 2nd again, I think. Again from last on the grid. And then 2014, I did it for a 3rd time. And by this point, I wasn't thinking of going to GT racing, by the way. I was just trying to kind of scratching an itch. I was trying to get to the World Finals again. And in 2014, the day before the final race in the African Open, I cracked a rib. So I still did the actual final with some painkillers, and I finished 5th. And just by the way, for those listening, the level of competitiveness in South African karting is incredibly high. We had, during my time, 6 world champions come from South Africa. My karting mentor was a world champion. So in order to qualify for the Rotax Max finals, you had to beat world champions in order to do it.
Okay. Yeah.
So it was very, very competitive, very high bar. So you weren't just beating your average Joe, you're beating guys who took karting quite seriously.
Yeah.
Okay, so after I cracked my rib, I decided to retire properly, and I gave away all my racing stuff. I gave away my helmets and everything. But the race was in April or something like that, and in June or July, when is Le Mans? I think it's in June.
Second week of June. Yeah.
Yeah, I was sitting there watching Le Mans. I saw a guy standing in the pit lane. It was the night stints. And he was standing in the pits, and he decided, I looked at him and I said, wow, imagine standing in the pits at night and there's a GT car coming towards you and you're about to jump in that thing and go drive into the night. I mean, at Le Mans, that must be amazing. I wonder if I could get there. So I did some maths. There's 60 cars on the grid and 3 drivers per car, 180 drivers. I'm pretty sure I can be one in 180. So that's sort of how it got going. It started in 2012 when I finished second in the African Open,
Yeah.
proving to myself I had the ability. Then the following season, 2013, that team I raced for offered me a full season of karting as sort of their pro driver. I didn't get paid or anything. I was actually still paying money, but they provided me with the chassis. And then it went from there. And then during that whole time, by the way, I was using Gran Turismo and what else was I using? I think iRacing or R Factor to stay sharp. So, since this is a podcast about the sim racing stuff,
Absolutely.
I've always been a huge fan of using sim racing to prepare for the real thing. And I mean, now I've taken it up many levels since then because I wasn't taking it as seriously back then, but I was always playing it with the thought of sort of how do I use this to improve my on-track experience? Because when I was racing karting, I was racing on such a shoestring budget. I had no money for testing. I would just arrive at the races. Sometimes I would just arrive on race day. And in karting, if you're not there from Wednesday practicing, you're missing out, So I always thought to myself, okay, well, I got the PlayStation. I can use the PlayStation to practice while my competitors are at the track. So yeah, that's my application of sim racing at the moment.
And you told the story to Zach. Was it in 2014? You said you had a belief in yourself that you could become a pro, and then there was a guy, an engineer called Gianfranco, and he said to you, you have enough talent to be a professional. And then you you knew then you had to continue, wasn't it? So was that in 2014 during the Super Trofeo days?
Yes. So in 2014, I did 2 races. The first one was in September in the Italian GT, but I was racing a Super Trofeo spec car, which is a Gallardo Lamborghini V10. And at that point, my engineer, the engineers in GT racing are freelancers. So they chop and change between teams. But Gianfranco was very old and experienced, a friend of my manager, Alan McDonald. And after the event, I did quite well in the Italian GT. I had the pace to be on the podium. I'd never driven on such a heavy car. I'd never driven at Imola, but I had some pace, and I was pretty happy, honestly. And I was ready to go home. After trying to get to Le Mans, which was in the same year, after making the phone calls to try to get to Le Mans, I realized that I didn't have the money to get there. They needed like 300,000 euros for a seat, and even if you had the money, you needed some kind of CV to prove that you could drive at Le Mans. No team's just going to give it to you. And I was like, geez, this is sounding more like €1 million, not 300,000 euros. And I had like 20,000 euros, so.
Yeah.
So after the Italian GT, I was like, cool, I ticked that box. I raced overseas. I raced at Imola. I raced in a Lamborghini. How much more could you want? And then Gianfranco said to me at dinner after the event, this guy, he'd worked with Juan Montoya, he'd worked with Tom Christensen, Pedro Diniz.
Okay, yeah.
He's seen them all. And he said, you have the ability and the professionalism to become a pro. And that was like, he should have never told that to me, frankly.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And he said to me, look, if there's more opportunities, I will let you know. And I'm like, yeah, I've heard that story 1 million times in my life. I came home to South Africa. I was very content and happy and got on with my job. And then, true as hell, Gianfranco gave me a call. He gave my manager, Alan McDonald, he gave my Alan a call. Oh, by the way, Alan wasn't really my manager at the time. He was just the guy who managed to get me the seat in Super Trofeo.
Yes.
And we kind of just kept going from there. So Alan called me and said, look, Gianfranco just gave me a shout. There's this World Finals Super Trofeo event in Malaysia, and they want you in the car. And, can you find the money to get there? And I kind of found the money to get there. I think I found half of it. And I was teamed up with a driver called Mirko Bortolotti, who is a very, very, very good and successful GT3 driver these days.
And he's in ACC actually. He's in the opening. He's
Yes.
in the opening video in the career for Assetto Corsa Competizione, which we'll talk about later. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah, correct. And so he was my teammate, and I was like, oh my god. So we were racing in the Pro Am, so they needed an amateur. I was the Am, and we were leading the race, and came into the box to do the driver change. I went out the pits to turn 1, turn 2, got to turn 3, no brakes. The brakes failed, crashed into the wall, broke my leg. Was a mess. Was an absolute mess. The team was really upset with me. They told me it was my fault. It only turned out like 2 months later that they found out that it wasn't my fault. But at the time, they're like, you'll never be a racing driver again. Like, go home. Sit.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it was terrible. It was terrible, terrible, terrible. I really, truly had a shocking day.
Wow.
And my leg hurt like hell.
So did you actually break the leg?
Yes, I broke my leg, yeah.
Oh, wow.
But
did you go back to Cape Town? Sorry, David. Did you go back to Cape Town then in a cast, or how did it go?
No, I didn't even have the track didn't even have a crutch. So at the time, my leg just hurt a lot. Like, it was in a lot of pain. But I could still kind of put weight on it. So I thought that I just bruised it or something. But by the time I got back to Cape Town, I couldn't walk out the plane, and eventually went for an X-ray. They're like, "Oh no, you've broken your leg."
Wow.
So that was a low point, because at that point the team didn't want to hear from me and everything. However, once they discovered that the brakes had failed and I didn't just decide not to brake, so they gave me a call and they said, "Okay, we need you again for the Italian GT Championship in 2015. Can you find the budget?" And the budget they needed was 105,000 euros.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. Yeah.
Oh, it's a nice house, I can tell you that.
Big time, yeah.
And I didn't have the money, but
no.
What I did was I'd already, as a coincidence kind of, I'd sold a portion of my shares in my company, and that gave me enough for half of the season. So that was very reckless, and that was a major risk that I took. Probably the first risk that I took was taking the money that I should have kept for when I was older and using it for half a season of GT racing without any indication that that money would, or that season would, take me further as a racing driver.
Yeah.
So I signed this contract for 100,000 euros, knowing fully well that I only had about 40, and went racing. And by the middle of the season, I told the team, "Look, I've run out of money." And then they started to give me sort of concessions and delay invoices, and I found some sponsors. I sold my car. I sold whatever I had. To keep going. And that season was very good, and I won more races than anyone else. I got more pole positions. I should have won the championship, I think, but we had two incidents and one puncture.
Yeah.
But in the end, it was a good thing that I didn't win the championship, and I'll explain that in a second. And that was it, really. The team needed more money for the next year. They needed, instead of 100,000, they needed about 250.
Wow.
And I was like, well, I didn't even have 100. How the hell am I going to find that level of money? And then full credit to my manager at the time, Alan. By now we'd developed a really good relationship, and he was coming with me to all the races, and he was just helping me out of kindness or something. He heard about a possible seat in GT3 racing in the Blancpain GT with Kessel, with Ferrari.
Yes.
And that was the next step. They also needed a lot of money, but it was a different level. I was able to find someone who could help me, and that was sort of the next chapter. So the reason that it was good that I didn't win the Italian championship is, usually if you win a championship, the FIA looks at your results and your performance, and they'll regrade you from an amateur to a. So there's 4 rankings: bronze, silver, gold, platinum. A bronze is a flat out amateur. He's a gentleman driver, pays his own way, does it for fun. A silver driver is kind of like the catch-all box for people who aren't necessarily amateurs, but are not considered top level pros. And
Yeah.
then gold is a top level pro, and platinum is like a Formula One driver, an LMP1 driver, a Formula E driver, DTM driver.
Exactly. Like
So
Tom Christensen, for example. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So if I had won that Italian GT Championship, I would have been upgraded, most likely upgraded from a bronze amateur to a silver non-pro, and no one would have wanted me, because in pretty much every GT racing championship, you need an amateur in the car. You need a bronze driver. And some of
Yes.
the teams are often looking for the fastest amateur driver they can find. And at the time, I was one of the fastest. So that's why Kessel gave me an opportunity. Yes, I still had to find a lot of money, but they gave me the opportunity or an offer to race in Blancpain GT.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was 2016.
And is that a stipulation by the FIA that there has to be a bronze driver amongst the three guys in the car? Is that the idea, or?
It depends on the category. So
Okay.
if you're in a Pro-Am car, then you have to have a bronze. If you're in an Am car, then all three drivers have to be bronze.
Yes.
If you're in a Pro car, then there's no requirements, but you probably need 3 pros in the car to stand a chance.
If you can get them. Yeah.
If you can get them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then there's the new Silver Cup class, which is 2 or 3 years old now, which requires a maximum of silver. So you can have 3 silvers in the car. That's what everyone else races with.
Yeah.
But in our case, we had 2 silvers and 1 bronze.
And in 2015, you were racing with Rinaldi, was it so?
Yes, Rinaldi is the team that I broke my leg with, and they're the team that I race Italian GT with. In the end,
Okay, yeah.
the guy who runs it, Marco Bielli, and I became very close. So he gave me a lot of leeway when it came to finding the money and delaying invoices. So
Yes.
maximum respect to him and credit.
Yeah. Amazing, exactly. And after all that happened, so in 2015 you raced for Rinaldi in the Italian GT Championship, GT Cup, in the Lamborghini Gallardo. That was a V10, and then you also raced in the Super Trofeo, which in English is Super Trophy. Yes. And that was in the Gallardo as an amateur. 2016 you were in the Blancpain GT Series Sprint Cup, the International GT Open, and then you also, there's a reference to you were first in Gulf 12 hours as a gentleman for Kessel, was it so?
Yes.
In 2016, yeah.
Yeah. So 2016 started incredibly difficult. So we entered the Blancpain Endurance Series, and in the first round I didn't drive because the engine failed. In the second round I didn't drive because the clutch failed, my fault. In the third round was Paul Ricard. We had major issues with a number of things, and didn't finish. But that was the first time I actually drove a GT3 in a race. So that was halfway through the season. I'd already spent all my sponsorship money, and I'd only done a few laps and had a DNF. So then my sponsor pulled out, my co-drivers pulled out, and for Spa 24 hours, which was my main target that year, I had no seat. And that was the first time that my family had to come forward and help me. So they bailed me out in a big way. Yeah. And I did the race with the Bentley, and that was a disaster. All 3 of my co-drivers crashed. And then I had nothing, so I came back to South Africa. Just had no idea what to do next because I had no sponsorship now. My relationship with Kessel was not good.
Okay, yeah.
Not because we didn't like each other. It's just my co-drivers created a nuclear bomb within our lineup, so the atmosphere was not good. And then at the last minute, one of the co-drivers, his name is Stephen Earl, the Doc, who I still coach to this day, another unbelievable person, and another point in my career where I was lucky. He said, okay, let me do some races with David. We'll race in the amateur category. We need 2 bronze drivers. He can be my fast bronze. So we did a Blancpain sprint race in Budapest, Hungary, which we won. Then we did the International GT Open, which we won. And then my relationship with Kessel had sort of reignited itself, and they offered to let me race for free in the Gulf 12 hour, which we won. And the teammates that I won the Golf 12 Hour with other teammates that I went into 2017 with.
Okay. And where was the Golf 12 Hour? Sorry, where was that event
It's
exactly?
in Abu Dhabi. It's in Abu Dhabi.
Okay.
At the F1
Yeah.
track, yeah.
That must have been an experience.
Oh yeah, it's fun. It's I'm doing it
Yeah.
again this year. I've won it twice, and I'll go again this year. And this year it's incredibly awesome because I'll be sharing a team with Valentino Rossi. So he will be in the car next to me, and he is my racing hero. He's above every other racing driver I can think of, and I'm incredibly nervous to meet him.
And he's the MotoGP driver, isn't he? Sorry.
Yeah. Valentino Rossi is he's one of the greatest of all time in all forms of motorsport. And my very first karting helmet, I got his autograph. Through someone else. Someone took my helmet with them, got his autograph. I still have that helmet. I still have his autograph. It's fading fast. But so I don't clean it because I
No, of course not. No.
So I get to meet him properly, and I mean that will be just unreal for me.
And there was something in the news recently about him and Hamilton switching positions in December. Was it so?
Yeah,
or did I read
that actually happens like 2 days before the Abu Dhabi race. So the
cool. Okay.
Yeah. So
and the Abu Dhabi, the 12 hours, that was your first time there, and your team won. Was it so?
Yeah. But to be honest with you, the Golf 12 Hour, I mean, I'm happy that we won it, but it's not necessarily that big a deal, to be honest. It's a race where the teams use it as a way to introduce gentleman drivers to their team, to their cars, to GT3 racing, so that you can prepare for the next season. And the atmosphere is very relaxed, very fun. But it was an important race for me. It was
indeed.
It helped me get my seat for 2017.
And then in 2017, you were first in the Blancpain GT Series Endurance Cup as an amateur, and then you were also first in the Blancpain GT Series Sprint, wasn't it so?
Yeah, it was a phenomenal season. I think I won almost everything I entered. So very good year. Not sure if I'll repeat that. That was the year that I went to Fiorano to receive the award for being a successful Ferrari driver. Just Indeed. By the way, I still am not. I'm not a factory driver.
No.
I just race exclusively.
Not yet.
Ferraris.
Not yet.
I try every angle, but they keep reminding me that I'm a bit too old. But I keep trying.
Wow. If you're too old, David, there's no harm. There's no hope for me at all. And in 2017, the 2017 season, you were driving the Ferrari, the 458. Was it so?
I was driving both the 458 and the 488. So in endurance, I was racing the 488, and in sprint, I was driving the 458. And oh man, both cars are beautiful to drive, but that 458, Indeed. The engine, the handling, it feels very much like a race car.
Yeah, and I noted from your video the details, the differences between the two, and it's something I made notes about. I wanted to talk about later. And then in 2018, you were second. You did a video recently about Suzuka. In the Suzuka 10 hours in the Pro-Am Cup, you were second, and you drove for, was it Hub Auto Corsa? That's another
correct,
team,
yes.
Was it so?
Yes, correct. I was racing for Hub Auto, I got a call at the last minute there. It was a coincidence, it was through a friend called Nick Foster, who was going to be my teammate. And we headed over there. We both got pole position in our qualifying runs. Car was very fast. Team makes a very, very, very fast qualifying car. But in the race, we had a failure with the fuel pump, so our pit stops were delayed, and we ended up finishing second. So it was a bit frustrating because we started pole position overall. You know, our target was therefore to try and win it overall. But this pit stop issue was costing us 10 to 15 seconds per pit stop.
Yeah.
And in GT racing, you are literally fighting for tenths of a second for multiple hours of a race, and you just can't make that back. So in the end, P2 was cool. Probably one of my favorite experiences as a GT driver, as a racing driver, because we're racing at Suzuka, and Suzuka is legendary, and racing in Japan is legendary, and I don't know if I'd ever go back because I don't have any clear opportunities to get there. So I just treasure that race because it was special.
Yeah. And there's a story from your chat with Zach, which I enjoyed, that you began as bronze and you became silver, and you wanted to race at the 24 Hours of Spa as a pro amateur. And then Michele Rinaldi said, if you race in the GT Open at Spa in 2018, and which was a month before the 24 Hours of Spa, if you race there, you get pole, the fastest lap, and lead the race, he'll consider you for the 24 hours. And then you got P1 overall, and you also got a GT3 lap record, which you held for a year, wasn't it so?
Yeah. So at the beginning of 2018, I had no opportunities because I was eventually upgraded to a silver driver. And no one wants a bronze driver that's just been upgraded to silver. They rather find a silver driver who's got experience, right? I mean, that's obvious.
Exactly.
So I had zero opportunities. I read a news article somewhere about this team called Rinaldi Racing that was still searching for a driver. I cold emailed him. I was in Germany at the time. I then drove to his offices, waited in the waiting room for about an hour for him to meet me. He said, okay, come do a test. If you do well at the test, then maybe we can do something. Did the test, did well. He offered me a seat in the GT Open with one of his co-drivers. But I really wanted to race at Spa again because the prior year in 2017, we won Spa 24 as amateurs. And I wanted to prove that I could do it again in a Pro-Am lineup as a sort of silver driver.
Yeah.
He said, you're not fast enough, buddy. We're going to find another more qualified gold driver. I said, just give me the chance. He says, I can't. My customers want a more qualified driver in the car. I said, okay. I didn't accept that. So I kept pushing him. And he said, okay, fine.
Yeah.
Here's what you need to do. Okay. Knowing that this was impossible, by the way. He said, okay, we're racing GT Open at Spa a month before the Spa 24. You need to get pole position. You need to get the fastest lap. You need to lead the race. And if you do that, I'll consider you for the seat in the 24 hour.
Yeah.
So there was no guarantees. I said, okay. Now keep in mind, I wasn't a very good qualifier my whole life. Even for that Rotax Max World Finals, where I finished 6th and was fighting for the win, I qualified 32nd. So not a good start. But anyway, went to this race in Spa. We were on the Michelin tire and the GT3s. I had a very good feeling on the Friday practice. Woke up Saturday morning and track conditions were perfect for lap records. And after my first lap, I was already P1 overall. I thought he was joking. I thought the other guys hadn't done a lap yet. And then the next lap, I improved. He said, you're still P1. And by the end, I got the pole position. And I didn't know that I'd beaten the lap record. I did a 2 minutes 15.8, which was very, very, very fast. It felt fast. I was shaking afterwards. I was quite emotional as well because I never believed that I could actually do a pole position against pro drivers. And what happened? Then later they told me you broke the lap record. So that was cool. But I still
unbelievable. Yeah.
That was very cool because, Spa's a special place and everyone wants to be fast at Spa. So to hold that lap record was quite special. And a couple of weeks later, he phoned me and he said, you'll be racing in the Pro-Am car and he's going to pay me to do it. So he put like this cherry on top, which was quite surreal, to be honest, because I wasn't asking to be paid or anything. I was just happy to race at Spa 24 for free. And that was my first race as a paid racing driver. So
okay. So in the GT Open, the month before, did you have to pay for yourself?
I was racing for free.
You're racing for free. Okay, yeah.
So first you start as a guy who has to bring sponsorship. You have to bring money. If you're good enough, then maybe they'll let you race for free because the other driver pays for the whole thing.
Okay.
And then if you're really good and you're really professional, then they'll pay you.
Okay.
It's a long process, and there's no return on the investment, by the way.
No,
in the end,
course not. No.
You kind of don't make your money back, but it's nice to get paid to race. So
in the GT Open, so in a month before the 24 Hours of Spa, Michele Rinaldi gave you a chance, and basically they provide everything. You turn up for free. You drive the car for free, and then because you achieved what you did, you a month later you were also in the Spa 24 hours, and you got paid, which was your first time to be paid, which was cool.
Yeah. And we ended up winning it. So I won Spa 24
Indeed.
2 times in a row. So I justified the risk that Michele took on me. And he kept reminding me that he was taking a risk.
Yeah, I'm sure.
David, this is a big risk for me. If you mess up, my customers will be very upset.
Yeah.
But in the end, I like to believe that I made the difference in the car. So
Yeah, and it also made a big difference, obviously, in terms of your career.
Yes. Because that was last year. Now this year, I'm a full-time paid racing driver, and I think it was born out of that performance at Spa.
Indeed. So, and currently now, this is from my notes, and I know you explained it earlier, and if you wouldn't mind, explain it again for us noobs, and me especially. Now, currently you're in the Blancpain GT Series Sprint and Endurance Cup in the European Championship. You're also in the Intercontinental GT Challenge, the Italian GT Championship, am I right? And then the Nations Cup. So will you explain those? How do they all lay out together, and how does it work in terms of scheduling, if you know what I mean?
So the scheduling is a nightmare. So you kind of choose a priority championship. So usually if you're offered a seat in either ELMS or Blancpain GT, those become your priority. But the GT World Challenge is only 10 races a year. And you can't really survive off 10 races a year. So you try to fill your calendar with as many races as possible. Now, it's not a case of, I'll just phone a team and they'll just give me some racing opportunities. It's quite a bit more complicated.
Yeah.
So you kind of look at the championships around the world or around Europe, and you see if there's any interest for you to be in that car, or if you can convince your existing team why you should race in certain races on top of the GT World Challenge. So the Italian GT, for example, that was a one-off event that we entered. They have a whole championship. We only entered one event so that my two teammates could prepare for the Nations Cup. So that was a bonus for me there. Then I also did some races in the Creventic Hankook 24-hour series. And that was with the same team but different drivers, and those were sort of extra races, if you will, because again my focus was the Blancpain GT World Challenge. And then the ELMS stuff came as a bonus because the driver in that car decided not to finish the season, and they wanted a fast driver in the car to replace him, so I got the call, and that was because of my existing relationship with Kessel. But yeah, I mean, it's often your season is only determined sort of in January, February, March of the year that you'll be racing. So at least in January and February, you don't do any racing unless you race in America or Asia. I don't really have any strong links there, so I don't race there. So you're jobless for 2 months, and then testing starts in March, April.
Yeah.
But yeah, generally what you try to do is you try to nail down a championship, a full season championship, and the priority is GT World Challenge or European Le Mans Series. And then you have, if you can't get a seat there, because it's not easy, then you try to get a seat in GT Open. If you can't get a seat in GT Open, then you look at the national series like the ADAC GT Masters, which is that's the German championship, or Italian GT, or the British GT. But all of this comes down to the relationship that you have with the person who's going to pay for that racing. And the person who pays for that racing is the gentleman driver. So in my case, my gentleman driver is a driver called Rinat Salikov. He's my age, very successful guy from Russia. And we work together to plan our season. I'm his pro, if you will. So we always want to race in the GT World Challenge, the Blancpain series. So that's always a priority. And then we kind of look to see if we can add on some races above that, 2 or 3 races. And then once that's down, once that's nailed, then I will speak to Rinaldi about me doing other races for them in separate championships. Races like VLN, which is the Nordschleife racing.
Yeah.
The Hankook 24-hour series. And then whatever else we can find on top of that.
Yeah. And is this, these various events, is this always in the Ferrari for Rinaldi, or are you driving different brands as well, or?
No, it's always with Ferrari.
Yeah. Okay.
So I try, look, I still have the unrealistic dream to work for Ferrari officially one day. So
yeah.
One of my strategies is to stick with Ferrari racing cars throughout the season, because then at every race, I'm interacting with Ferrari engineers at every single race.
Yeah.
And I just hope that one day I leave a big enough impression that they say, hey, Dave, do you want to come test maybe a new ABS system or a new traction control system or a new aero package? And maybe their factory drivers aren't available, but they know me very well. So they say, okay, well, David can do it for us. He has a lot of experience. So that's my loose plan to somehow get my way into Maranello.
Yeah, somehow, yeah.
So if I'm racing exclusively with Ferraris throughout the year, then I get to interact with the engineers, and that's kind of my plan.
Yeah, and obviously, if you know the car, you're familiar with the car, and with the several tracks that it races on, obviously, it gives you that competitive edge, I guess.
Yes, I know the Ferrari 48 GT3 very intimately now, and
yeah, indeed.
I have already pointed out some things to the engineers, like that they could improve upon, and they've used my advice for those instances. And it's just because I drive them every weekend, almost every weekend. So
yeah,
there's a huge benefit. I know, for example, if we need to if the problem that we have is related to suspension or damping or the diff or the compound of the brake pad, because I've done a lot of testing with brake pads even. I've driven the Ferrari on all kinds of tires now. So yeah, there's a big benefit. I know in every gear which is the ideal point in the revs to change gear, you know.
Yeah.
So those things help a lot. They help a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And did you tell, when you were talking with Zach, did you say to Zach, now from my notes here, that after the Ferrari Awards in Fiorino in 2019, that you decided to call it quits, sort of, as you had moved to silver, and then you had read an article that Rinaldi needed a racing driver for this year's season, or was it so? Or did I misread
That's correct.
that?
That's correct.
Yeah.
In 2018, the Ferrari Awards was in February or March. I think it was in March.
Yeah.
And usually by March, if you don't have a seat, you're out. And all the teams I'd spoken to weren't interested. They didn't need me. And I'd actually made a big life decision to leave South Africa to move to Europe/UK to pursue this thing. And I was already without a drive after 1 year. So I figured I either move back to South Africa or I do some karting for fun, and focus on my business again, another replay. And then that was already my decision at those awards. I hadn't given up. I just kind of, I'd run out of doors to knock on.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the following day, I'd read this article about Rinaldi, and decided to do a Hail Mary. And it was a Hail Mary because I didn't have their contact details. So I found them on Facebook and I sent a private message on Facebook. And their secretary, no, not their secretary, their logistics and team manager replied. I mean, it was so random. It was so random. And she gave me she gave me the email address of Michele. Now, it turns out Michele doesn't like email. He never replies. I've known him now very well. I see him every week for the last 2 years. And if he's not interested in you, he just simply doesn't reply. And for 2 days, I didn't hear from him. And then I got an SMS. I didn't get a WhatsApp. I got an SMS from him. To say, okay, I maybe have something for you. And then just on that, I was like, I can't let this die. I said, I'm in Germany. I'll drive to you. He's like, no, it's not necessary. And I just drove for 5 hours the next morning. to go meet him. And I don't know if that left an impression, but yeah.
And that's when you stood in the lobby for an hour waiting for him to come out, was it so?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. So sorry, I said after the awards in 2019 you decided to call it quits, but that was in early 2018.
Yes,
my mistake. So, and then as a driver yourself, you spoke about being a kind of a motorsport addict through and through, and also a fan. You're a fan before you're a racing driver, and I guess that's always been the case with you. Is it so?
Yeah, I still am a fan before I'm a racing driver. I know all the drivers' names. When I'm home, I watch racing on TV on top of everything else. When I'm at the racetrack, I watch junior karting events between my races. There's always racing on somewhere in my life. I visit the Autosport website 100 times a day. I have a list of people I follow on Twitter for motorsport. I'm rabid. I can't get enough.
It's probably like me. It's probably like me and following what's happening in sim racing, and in this case, you're doing both. So
I even watch sim racing.
Yeah.
Well, at racetrack, there's actually a lot of waiting time. You have to just sit around and wait.
Indeed, yeah.
So because between practice and your debrief, there's maybe 2-3 hours. Sometimes, I mean, in the ELMS, it's the worst schedule in the world. You arrive at 9 a.m. to do 7 laps of practice at 10 a.m. and then that's it for Friday. That's it.
Gee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you do 7 laps on Friday. I mean, how else do you fill your time? So I watch sim racing when I'm at the track as well.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. And you talked about, you mentioned, and I'm just kind of an extension of what you talked about with Zach, in the way that you said you've always had good co-drivers relative to your category, and how it was not easy to find pros who can dominate, which I can appreciate. And you mentioned that Mikko Bortolotti and Engelhardt dominated in 2018, and then I remembered there was the side note of them being disqualified. I think somebody had swallowed a memory card or something like that. But I that was in the back of my mind for some reason. And then I wanted to talk about how your preparation. I'm fascinated by, and I have my notes here, if you'll excuse me. So you said that now, and something which I can appreciate even on a sim racing level, how the difficulty in circuit racing is perfection, and you're obsessive about learning tracks, and you said you don't consider yourself the most talented driver, but you work hard. And then if you're preparing for the race, you'll begin by watching an onboard of let's say GT500, GT3 or F1, and then you'll make notes. And then you'll open up Google Maps and you'll trace the track using Adobe Illustrator to create vectors. And then you'll it's a form of meditation. So explain that concept to me, because I found that fascinating. That obviously you're a kind of a interface designer by trade, if you will. So explain that concept. Where did that idea come to open up Google Maps and then trace them out with vectors? Is that a form of learning the straights versus the curves and so on, or what's your kind of thought process there?
It came from karting, because where I grew up in Cape Town, we only had one karting track. So I spent the entire year for 3 or 4 years just driving one track, besides the tracks I played on Gran Turismo and so on. So when I used to go to a new track in the early days of karting, I would struggle so much to learn the track, because I just had no experience of driving a different racetrack. So I had to figure out a way to prepare how to do laps without doing laps.
Of course, yeah.
So back then, no one would do the kind of preparation I did for karting. But I had a real breakthrough when I did that world final in 2007, because I Googled the track, which was a new track, and no one had raced there before. So I Googled the track. I turned out that I found the track on Google Maps, but it hadn't been fully constructed yet. They just sort of, it was still muddy. It wasn't, it hadn't been surfaced yet.
Yes.
And I used that to trace it using vectors. and then printed that out, stuck it all over my house, my apartment, and then what happened? And then, so I put it at eye level when I woke up in the morning next to my bed. I put it in the cupboard, put it in the bathroom.
Yeah.
Then when I went to the track,
Interesting. Yeah.
I'd done so many mental laps around there that it felt like I'd done 1,000 laps in practice. But when I did my first lap around there, it felt like I'd done 10,000 laps already. So then I just took that further. And these days, because I race at tracks that exist in simulators, it makes it much easier.
Yeah.
But now I get someone else to do the vectors for me because they do it in much more detail, and I have very, very
but
nice
you still
track maps.
but you still use the same concept though, even though like you started because the karting track wasn't in the same, so you had to kind of trace it out to learn it beforehand because you'd no other way to drive it, to test it in a way. But you're still using this process, are you?
Yeah, I'm obsessed with the process, and
Yeah, interesting.
These days, to be honest, I don't use the simulator to actually learn the track in acute detail anymore.
Yeah.
Because the sims don't get it 100% right. So you don't want to you don't want to develop muscle memory for something that's 1% off, because that can actually throw you off by quite a bit.
Of course, yeah.
So what I do is I use the sim now to prepare my technique, or to refine my technique, to refine my motor actions, to refine how my ankle moves under braking, to refine how my knee moves under acceleration, those kinds of things. I develop the muscle memory using the simulator, but I still prepare just as much as before if I'm given the time. Like if you're racing every week, it becomes very, very, very difficult to prepare to the level that I used to, because there's just no time.
You're just traveling all the time, basically.
Yeah, you don't have time to breathe. But the benefit there is you're driving every weekend, so you get the benefit of knowing the car very well. So the variable of the track, and we visit the same tracks over and over.
Indeed.
That variable diminishes the unknowns. What you're trying to do is, when you arrive at somewhere new, you have to reduce the unknowns as much as you can. And one of those things is tracing the track, or going onto Google Maps, or doing the onboard videos.
Yeah.
I just know a lot of drivers don't do that. Some of them are lazy, and some just haven't been told. Some of them don't have the time. Some of them don't necessarily have the creativity.
Or don't have the software.
Or they don't have the software. But you can just just take screenshots on your phone of the track from Google.
That you can do. Yeah, that's true. That is true. Yeah.
And then look at it. But look, I'll be straight up honest. Every time people ask me this, I know I'm not the fastest driver in the world. And I have to make up for it in other ways. So I don't necessarily have the acute talent that other guys have, but racing is not just about your ability to take one corner fast. There's a whole thing around it.
Exactly. Dedication, planning, financing, sponsorships. It's the whole deal, basically, isn't it? So, yeah.
Yeah. But even just in terms of the driving, is understanding all the elements. I never used to realize how technical driving was.
Indeed.
Even when I took it seriously when I was younger, I've just come to realize more and more that there's an art form to this that you can work on and perfect to become a better racing driver, even if you don't necessarily have that ungodly natural talent,
Yeah. And something you said, and it got me thinking about even my own approach to sim racing. And you do coaching as well, which we'll talk about later. But you talked about you getting on a sim and you do as many laps as you can, but you just don't go around and round like I admit to trying to do in the Nordschleife, to try and learn the Nordschleife in a way which seems kind of sort of impossible. And then from the onboard, you'll try and find a car that's similar in terms of gear ratios and feeling, and you create a program for yourself. And then you have 90-minute sessions broken, 90-minute practice sessions broken up. So you're very deliberate about that. And then you said you'll start with, for example, 3 laps on old tires, and then you'll pit, you'll box, as you said, and then you'll switch to super stickies and then do 2 more laps, and you have a baseline, so how you're kind of mentally preparing for getting ready for an event, and then you would do that every morning for 2 weeks to create your baseline, and then every day you're thinking about the track like you did back in the day, looking at the picture of the karting track on the wall. So I found that kind of I found the whole process kind of fascinating, you know.
Yeah, you got to. Well, the premise is this: is when you get to a racetrack in real life and you have people around you that you have to deliver. There's a professional approach. There's a program. There's a timetable. There's a run plan. So how do you bring that home? So pretend that your simulator is the car, and you're at a racetrack. Then run to a program. And the worst thing that you can do in terms of improving as a driver is to do mindless laps. That's just going over and over and over. So you have to. The practice has to be deliberate. You have to have some kind of plan.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, my baseline testing. I no longer do it every day. I just do it like maybe once a week, where I'll go to the same track, same car, same tires, 5-lap run. Where am I? Okay, this is where I am. And that just helps. There's so many layers to how I can explain this. It's very difficult to articulate, but once you do enough laps of something, and that becomes second nature, the ability to drive, then your ultimate speed, I believe, is an emotional and mental game. So
absolutely, I agree. Yeah.
If I know how to get a car around a corner, but what determines my ultimate performance is how I feel on the day, emotionally. So my focus these days is I'm using the simulator more and more to identify how I'm feeling, and then trying to fix that, or not fix it, but just understand it and work with my emotions. So the sim is helping me identify those emotions, and when I'm stressed, when I'm too relaxed or whatever, so that when I get to the racetrack in real life, I'm more in tune. I'm more mindful of how I'm feeling, and depending on how I'm feeling is often a determination of how I perform.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
And then you talked about when you arrive at a race, which a good point you made with Zach, that when you arrive at a race, you're not thinking about overall pole. You're thinking about pole in your own category, and that's the way you should be doing, isn't it? So,
absolutely, you have to. You have to focus on your own race. Even though there's pro cars around you, factory drivers, you want to beat them. Beating them, trust me, has no bearing on my career, sadly. But winning my class does. So you have to shut out all the other stuff. And even if you're qualifying, let's say there's 60 cars on the grid and you qualify 30th. If you pole position in your class, because other guy's 32nd, then that's all that matters. Because
exactly.
you need to win your race, not other people's race.
Yeah, and especially in events like Le Mans, of course, where it's very focused on categories, isn't it? So, and indeed, VLN and so on. And then you had a video, which was, the title of the video was When Things Didn't Go As Planned, and you talked about racing at Spa and Pirelli versus Hankook, and you had a very dangerous moment, which I believe was the start of a puncture. And then back to your 2018 GT Open, getting your 2:15.8, and I watched you driving Eau Rouge. Now, what's it like to drive across Eau Rouge at that speed? Because it looks, from the onboard, it looks very bumpy. What does it feel like to pedal to the metal in 6th or 7th gear to cross Eau Rouge? I mean, without lifting. What's that like?
It's unbelievable, honestly.
Yeah.
It's so difficult to explain, but there's a lot of bumps in the middle, and your car flexes a lot through there on the suspension. It loads up a lot on the left rear, which unloads the front of the car and gets like this hopping action. And if you hop in the wrong way, basically, you're going to land up in the wall. It takes a long time to build up the confidence to try to take Eau Rouge flat. And it's cool because GT3s are still in this window where Eau Rouge is very much a challenging corner. If you go through there in a Formula 3 car, it's easy flat. If you go through there in a Formula 1 car, it's easy flat. But GT3, it's still in a window which makes it an incredibly challenging corner that you cannot take for granted. There's massive accidents there every year in GT3s.
Yeah, that's what you said in the video. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to respect that corner. Every time I get there, so I'm driving down towards Eau Rouge, I think to myself, please, 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 not this time.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Because it's tough, man. And
yeah.
when you get out on the top, the feeling is, I mean, you're not relieved or anything, that you're satisfied because it's such an incredible corner. You feel this massive compression, then this crazy unloading of weight, and then again like a landing and a compression, and you have to get your steering just perfect to minimize any of the scrubbing of speed through there, and you have to hit the apexes perfectly. And the other thing is, it happens so quickly. Like before you know it, you've gone through and you've come out the other end. But in that, I don't know how long it takes. I need to time it, but let's just say 1 or 2 seconds or 3 seconds. It's probably longer. Let's say it's 5 seconds. It feels like a tenth of a second. It's all about how you go in. It's about the turning points to the when you turn right for the first time. Which part of the curb you're touching through the right-hander. And oh man, at night, if you do that thing at night,
I cannot imagine it. At night.
It's just the most incredible feeling. And you get in the 24 hours. At night, you do a double stint, which is it's about 45 laps, 60 laps, not 60, about 45, 50 laps. And oh my God.
Is it as scary every time though? I mean, because you never know what's going to happen. Anything can happen. And you do 45 laps, anything can happen during any of those laps, isn't it so?
The whole track of Spa is scary. Everyone talks about Rouge, but wait till you go through Blancpain flat for the first time. I mean, Blancpain is another one which catches people out. Yeah. And it's another terrifying corner. And at night, you can't see Blancpain. You can't see it. You only see it when you turn.
Of course not, no.
Whereas Eau Rouge, you drive towards it and you can see up the hill. Blancpain, your lights are pointing straight, but the corner goes left.
Yes.
So you use different track markers to turn in.
Exactly.
But yeah, Eau Rouge it's an incredible corner. Incredible.
So it's something else. And then you had a video at Mugello, and you were racing for Wochenspiegel Team Monschau, which was part of, which is via Rinaldi. And I noticed there was a lot of traffic. There was you in the Ferrari. And then there was a lot of, I noticed from a lot of videos, of course, like you said, you're doing many different events. There's a lot of like GT4 cars, like there might be an Aston Martin GT4, there might be a Ginetta, there's a lot of traffic. And then you talked about you were driving behind, in this particular video of Mugello, you were driving behind Daniel Kielwitz, who's like a GT Masters champion and a Nordschleifer specialist, and like somebody like that fascinates me, of somebody who in the real world is like a Nordschleifer specialist, and here's me like at home in my office chair, leaning back and trying to appreciate like I can approach Eau Rouge in a sim, but of course I don't get the feeling of speed. I don't get the G-forces. I don't get the motion or the elevation. And the same for Nordschleifer. I mean, there's laser scan Nordschleifer now in our Factor 2, and in terms of simulations, you can take your pick. But like you're talking about somebody like Daniel Kielwitz, who's like a Nordschleifer specialist, that in the real world, like that fascinates me completely.
Yeah, and Daniel is so chilled. It's almost like he couldn't be bothered. But he's brilliant. His couldn't be bothered attitude, I think, is one of the reasons why he's so quick in everything he drives, and at the Nordschleifer, because it doesn't scare him. It really doesn't scare him. So he's got something I don't. He's unplugged the fear factor.
He must have done. Maybe he has disconnected something in his brain.
Yeah, he's a good guy. He's a really nice guy. We'll be racing together, not in the same car, but same team in South Africa at the end of this month in the Kyalami 9-hour. So,
okay, yeah, of course.
Yeah, so,
and Kyalami is a track that's kind of coming back. It's coming to one of the. I think who is it? Is it Race Room or R Factor 2 is bringing it? Is it so? I can't remember.
Assetto Corsa.
Assetto Corsa.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I said the course of competizione is
Yes.
bringing Kailami. Excuse me. Indeed. Now you talked about we just mentioned Mugello and Suzuka, and those among you. You have three favorite tracks: Mugello, Suzuka, and Imola. So can you explain why is that so? Is that from the tracks that were in Gran Turismo when you were younger, or is it the feeling of the tracks, or what is it about them that you like so much?
So Imola is my number one because it's so technical, and I mean, what a
Indeed,
place, and very fast as well. Even with the chicanes, I mean, you have to really get those chicanes nice and precise. I've only driven there 2 or 3 times, but beautiful racetrack, just beautiful. I wish I could race there every year. And it's got gradients, it's got everything. Very difficult to overtake, very difficult to put a lap together. Then Mugello, because it's very fast and flowing. Also, beautiful part of Italy. Not easy to get right. Some people call it boring because, I mean, if you look at the track map, it looks like the corners are repeated. But there's details there. And to be honest with you, Mugello may one day slip out of my top 3, but for now it's still there. And Suzuka, because if you go off at Suzuka, you hit a wall. And 130R, or as they say, R130, is still an incredibly tough corner in GT3. Big crashes there if you get it wrong. Easy flat in Formula 1. It is not flat in a GT3 car. As obviously the S's, if you get those right, so it's a beautiful feeling at Suzuka. So it's very fast flowing circuit, very much a driver's track, very challenging. And then there's the rest. I'm trying to think of other tracks that obviously I like Spa. It's not my favorite, but I like it a lot. I actually also like Abu Dhabi because it's very technical. I like technical tracks, even though I struggle at them. I do like them a lot. I got
that impression, and maybe that's why you're so fascinated by Mugello, Suzuka, and Imola, just as examples right now. Yeah.
So because of my driving style and the way that I brake, I tend to do better at high-speed tracks where you can blend the braking and the throttle. And I struggle at slow-speed tracks where you have to stop the car, get it turned, and then get on the power.
Okay.
Yeah, I have my natural style of driving is to carry speed through the apex of a corner. And in GT3 racing, that's sort of not what you want. You want to stop the car, turn it, and then get going as quickly as possible. But I carry too much speed in the apex, around the apex. So high-speed tracks where that is beneficial suit me well. But slow-speed tracks like Budapest or Misano or Silverstone's another one I like, by the way. Silverstone I really enjoy.
Quite technical as well, isn't it?
Oh, very high speed though. Whoa.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I mean, wow. If you get the corners right there, every sector has got something which is just magical. So I love that track. I love that track.
Quite different, yeah. And in terms of driving, do you have a preference for sprint or endurance, or what about daytime versus night? Are you equal for both, or how does it go for you generally?
Nighttime is my favorite.
Really?
Yeah. Oh yeah, because you're on your own, basically. That's what it feels like. And it depends on the endurance race. I love Spa. Obviously, I still want to somehow get to Le Mans. Sprint racing is cool because you flat out and it's high. It's very aggressive. But I mean, the Ferrari is a 700,000 euro car. So, and the guys are not scared of bumping wheels and doors and wing mirrors and diffusers. So it can get expensive for your gentleman driver, and you have to be very, very aware of that.
Yeah.
So that's quite stressful. But endurance racing is fun if you're in the rhythm, if you got good teammates, if you are fit, if you're well nourished. Because when you're tired at an endurance race, it really becomes hard work. I just mean not on like you don't become physically tired because it's not that physical, but it is exhausting. It's mentally exhausting, especially.
It's the concentration you need to keep up.
Yeah, and your body, it at the end of the race, it feels bruised. You feel like, it's like stiff and tough, and like it's tough.
Being tense for so long.
Yeah. So if you're not prepared for that, that can really suck. It can be that you just want to get through it by the end. But if everything's going smoothly, then it's fun. The thing is, though, at sprint race weekends, it's just so competitive. So there's a lot of enjoyment on that side. They both have their benefits, but I miss racing in sprint races more often. I wish I could do it more often.
Okay. So it's mostly endurance events you've been doing then. Is it so, or?
Both. I've mixed. It's a big mixture this year. 1 hour stints.
Okay.
I've done a lot of 1 hour stints this year. That's endurance.
Okay. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then something I wanted to ask you about was tires, and of course this is there are variations in terms of how tires are modeled. You have the contact patch and so on, and you talked about, for example, how the Michelin tires, like you could have 2 laps at a push at Spa if they were heated, and how Rover Racing Porsches had much better traction on Barcelona. So if you talk about let's say Pirelli versus Michelin versus Hankook versus so on, do you have a preference for tires, or what is it about tires that you need to know? Because obviously it's more pertinent in the real world, of course, but do you as a real driver over time, do you learn to know or be aware of how different brands behave, if that makes any sense?
Yeah. The tires, there's a huge difference between the tires and how they feel. It's massive. But it's massive in like the most subtle way. Like if you have no experience, if I had sent you out on a Michelin in the GT3 and then brought you into box and then changed you to a Pirelli, you wouldn't know the difference at all. And if you said that there was a difference, you'd be making it up. Your brain would be telling you lies, basically, because it's very nuanced. But the nuances in the end, if you know the details, are huge. And for example, the Michelin tends to just feel more grippier. You can brake and turn a lot more aggressively with the Michelin. You don't have to worry too much about wheel spin. The Pirelli, you have to be very careful with the angle or the approach that you take into a corner and how you load the tire going into a corner. You don't want it to be sliding across the surface. It really punishes you for that.
Yeah.
And then the Hankook, I don't know, I'm sorry to Hankook, but that thing feels like a brick. So
interesting. Yeah. Because Hankook do the tires for the DTM as a rule, or at least they have been for several years now.
Remember, I mean, for example, in the Pirellis, just as an example, we use a DHE, and we used to use a DHD, and next year we would use the DH something 2, DHD2 or DHE2, and these are different constructions. They have different ways of making the tire, and you can feel the difference. You will feel the difference. And
okay.
So it depends. Like the Hankook DTM tire, it must be a good tire because it has to cope with DTM levels of stress.
Yeah.
Whereas the Hankook GT3 tire, I know for a fact because they tell us that it's actually built off old technology, and they have to finish making the batches before they upgrade to a more modern specification.
Okay.
But it's the Hankook tire it has no feeling for me. I don't feel it very well. The Michelin tire, everyone loves a Michelin tire. Everyone does. A lot of people like the Dunlop tire, and to be fast in a Pirelli tire takes a lot of experience with the Pirelli tire. Like a lot of people can jump into a Michelin tired car and be quick.
Yeah.
It's a lot more forgiving because it has so much grip at a lot of angles. But the Pirelli tire is like, it takes a lot of experience to exploit it to the maximum. And you can see a lot of guys who don't have Pirelli experience but are platinum ranked drivers will struggle initially. They'll ask
interesting.
They'll ask too much of the tire, especially on corner entry. And this can affect your performance. But it just takes time.
And do you have a preference, if you're racing sprint or endurance in the Blancpain GT, do you have a preference for what tyre you would have, or if it's a case of you're going to an event and certain tyres are specified, you go, oh no, this is not going to work out well for me?
I know that if I'm going to race in a Hankook race, I'm going to struggle in qualifying.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, the Michelin is just so fast. I mean, okay, here's an example. So that lap record I did at Spa was a 2:15.8
Yes.
on the Michelin. And then in the race, we were doing 2:17s. But the Pirelli's Super Pole record, I think, is a 2:17.5 or 2:17.8, so 2 seconds slower. And in race pace is a 2-minute 23, 2-minute 24.
Oh, really?
So if you can imagine a 5-second delta between a 2:17 with the Michelin race tire and a 2:23, so 6 seconds, it feels night and day.
Yeah, it has to,
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I speak with Pirelli a lot. We always tease them, by the way. We give them a tough time. But yeah, they I mean, look, they make a very good tire. It's a safe tire. I mean, the Pirellis, more championships in the GT world use Pirellis than any other tires. So they have a lot of data, a lot of information. The tires they make are very good. But ultimately, the Michelin, or at least the spec that I've driven, I don't know what spec it is. It's they called SP something.
Yeah.
It's SP3 or I don't know what it is. Very quick and very fun to drive because it's so forgiving. So your driving style is not as influential on your lap time as it is in a Pirelli. You know, if you abuse the tire with a Pirelli, you're just not going to get the lap time.
And this is something you learn with experience. Back to your trip to Italy, your dad paid 6,000 for you to go there and you'd be a mechanic. So when you were growing up in Cape Town, he
didn't have the 6,000. He paid for the flight.
That was, sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Your dad paid for the flight. Sorry, my mistake.
No, it's fine.
Did you have because I talked with Niels from Huskenveld in the last episode, and Niels's father worked in the bank, so there was no history of tinkering with cars or bikes at home. So how about you in Cape Town? Do you come from a mechanical family? Because you went to the karting race as a mechanic. So where did you get those skills from?
I don't have the skills. No, my dad discouraged me from being a racing driver. He didn't want to come to the racetrack either. He wanted my brother and I to learn how to code. But you know, we would watch racing on TV, my brother and I. We'd watch bikes. And specifically, we liked the black bike. And that's where it came from very, very early on.
Okay.
And then when we discovered, my dad drove. He's a very fast driver, very, very, very good driver. And he did a tiny bit of racing in his early 20s, but nothing remarkable. And when we were in the car when we were young, I used to love it when he drove fast. And where we grew up in Cape Town, there's a lot of good roads, windy roads, and he would give it the beans, basically.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, when I started racing, the guy who introduced us to karting actually started as my mechanic / teacher. His name was Claude. And Claude, who I still keep in touch with to this day, he taught me how to change an engine. He taught me how to change tires and stuff. And then from there, my brother and I were self-sustaining, self-sufficient, because my dad wouldn't take us to the track or anything like that.
Yeah.
And he didn't really pay for it. He'd give us enough money for, I think, a set of tires, which I think back then was like £100. But we had to find the money for everything else. So, but all that time he was really pushing us to learn how to be computer programmers. And the day I left school, that's exactly what I had to do. He gave me like a 2-minute crash course in programming, and then that became my day job. But I was using all my salary to go racing. And then I met Claudio Piazzamusso, who he had a real effect on my thinking as a driver. And he taught me much more detail about being a mechanic. Like, still to this day, though, I lost 2 or 3 national championships in the final round because I was such a bad mechanic. And it was to do with, like, I would leave a bolt loose in the carburetor or something like that. Like my jetting. My jets kept falling out. And that was all my fault. So I'm a terrible mechanic. If you want to not win a championship, then ask me. But I'm not afraid of getting my hands dirty. That's another thing.
No,
I mean,
that's the thing. Yeah.
This last weekend in the Nations Cup, one of my teammates had a big crash and we had to rebuild the car. It was in a bad way, and I got stuck in. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. They told me what to do, but I wasn't afraid of getting stuck in. It was fun. So just add that to the resume.
A learning experience, no doubt. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now you talked about you're racing now currently in the Ferrari, the 488 GT3, which is a 3.9 liter turbo, and you had this onboard story of a 458 versus the 488, which people had asked you to do, and how the 488 was a naturally aspirated V8, and the gear change was aggressive, and it had a tighter chassis and a tougher brake pedal. And now you moved on to the 488, the 3.9 liter turbo. So 458 naturally aspirated and the 488 was turbo. And you said about the bigger steering ratio increased makes it less responsive for gentleman drivers, obviously easier to drive. And how you talked about the more aero on the 488 allows you to take higher speeds through corners. And then you talked about the traction control system. And you explained it in the video, and I kind of got lost. So can you explain then, because in The Sims we have a traction control system. Maybe it goes from 1 to 10 or 1 to 11, and maybe 11 is the highest or vice versa. So explain to me the traction control system in the 488 briefly. I won't keep you too long.
No problem. The TC in the 458 was quite simple. It was 1 to 10.
Yeah.
And we sat around maybe 3 or 4, but it was a very, very good traction control system. I mean, the TC in the 458 was beautiful, and the way it blended in on corner exit was very predictable and nice. So kudos there. Yeah. The 488 TC is much more complicated or complex. You have 2 settings, TC1, TC2. TC1 determines how much the car can slide before the TC activates. Okay. So that's I forget the name, but anyway, how much slide is TC1, and then TC2 is when the traction control does activate, how much does it activate by? So you tend to have a big number for the slide amount and a small number for the activation amount, for the cut.
Yeah.
So you don't want too much cut because it affects performance, but obviously you got to manage the wheel spin, especially with the Pirellis. But yeah, that's pretty much how it works, and that TC is in constant development. So the more you drive the car, the more feeling you have, the more you can speak with the engineers about modifying it. And yeah, I mean, I can't give away too much, but
no, of course not. No.
The basic level is you have these 2 buttons, how much slide and then how much cut. And
yes,
we run both of them around 3 to 5. So a very small window. So usually it's actually both are the same value, 3 and 3 or 5 and 5. Sometimes we'll go 5 and 3. If it's very high tire degradation, then we'll go very high. We'll go 7-7 or even 10-10. But those are extreme cases.
Yes.
I mean, in GT3s, and this is a funny thing about sim racing snobs, they're like, oh, we race without ABS and traction control in the sim. And I'm like, well, that's cool and well done. But in real life, the cars are built around these systems. They're optimized for these systems. So if you turn them off, you'll be slower. So the skill comes in how do you maximize the systems available to you. And so the thing is, in sim racing, like traction control can be very aggressive. Like in Assetto Corsa and iRacing and Gran Turismo, I either race with it off or around 1 out of 10 because anything above that tends to just kill the engine. And in real life, it's not how it works at all. It's much more dynamic, much more elegant, if you will.
Yeah. And then a final point on the cars, and then we'll move out. We'll move on to Sims, and before we close, we'll be here all day. Ferrari have just announced the 2020 488 GT3 Evo, which debuts with aero upgrades. So I guess that's what you would be driving next year, I guess. And then I wanted to know, in terms of a technical level, I guess this information is online anyway. But how close is a 488 GT3 to the road going 488? For example, the GT3 has a 3.9 liter turbo, and then between the gearbox, the differential, the ECU. How close is it technically to the road going version?
It's not close at all.
Completely different.
Yeah, I think even the chassis is different. It looks like the 488, and that's about the end of the line, really. I'm trying to think. The steering rack. So the ratio is straight out of the road car. Obviously optimized, but that's why we have this big steering ratio. It's because the ratio is the same ratio as the road car. The gearbox is a racing gearbox. The engine is actually not like the road engine, because the road engine has 750 horsepower. GT3 cars have 500 horsepower. So
of course, it's the balance of performance. Yes, of course.
So the engine is built around those optimizations.
Yes, of course.
Very, very expensive if you blow one up. I suppose the windscreen wiper is the same.
Yeah.
But even there, I may be talking nonsense. Elements of the interior look the same, but are different moldings. So, this is the thing. The 458 was actually quite similar. Not super similar, but there was a lot of crossover. Whereas the 488, it's a race car that looks like the road car.
So it's further. 488 is technically further away from the road going version than the 458 would have been.
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yes.
So it's more of a silhouette. And then in terms of Sims, and again back to what you talked about with Zach, you talked about you're waiting for the kind of crossover between Sims and real life, and how some of the GT Academy drivers have made it. Like I guess Jan Mardelborough, is that how you pronounce it? He's racing in Japan right now, last I heard. And then you talked about how at some point, or even now or in the future, there may be more money in esports than in real life. So did you ever consider competing in esports yourself?
Yeah, I would have loved to.
To generate some funds.
Not for the funds, but for the prestige, I suppose.
For the fun of it, yeah.
Yeah, I in 2010 I did the GT Academy.
Oh, did you? I didn't know that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I entered it and I finished because first you have to do the leaderboard thing, from home, and then if you're in the top whatever of your country, then you get a call to do the live event, and from the live event you do the knockouts, and then you go to the real car event. And in the leaderboard events, was it 2010 or 2011? I never remember clearly. I finished 4th in the world. My time was 4th fastest overall.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but I never got a call because I was from South Africa. And GT Academy is not for South Africans.
Okay.
But yeah, so I mean that was the first inkling that I still had some speed in me. So if I could be 4th out of a million entrants, then maybe I'm fast enough to come back to racing one day. But I would love to. It's an aspiration of mine, but I'm not quick enough to be at a FIA Gran Turismo event competing.
Yeah.
But they don't invite South Africans. I'm from South Africa.
Okay. Well, interesting. Yeah.
And so I would love to officially take part in one of those things. Not in the Pro-Am race. I want to be there on merit. But I don't get enough time anymore because I'm traveling so much. And
that's true, yeah.
The top guys, besides maybe Mikel Hizel, who's incredibly talented at Gran Turismo, and Igor Fraga, they spend a long time practicing every day, and I've seen it. In December when I'm not racing, in January when I'm not racing, I spend a lot of time in Gran Turismo, and I do get much quicker. I start to consistently compete with the top guys. So yeah, it's an aim of mine. I want to compete against some races, but I know that I know that I'm not quick enough, unfortunately, at that level anymore. I definitely was. There was a period where I could have definitely hung out with the big dogs, but
Yeah. Well, you were fourth in the world, so back in 2010 or 2011 or so, yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah.
that was back then. That's what, almost 10 years ago. So
Almost, indeed. Time goes quickly.
yeah,
But you did make a point that you wouldn't be where you are today without Sims, which of course is true. And
yes,
you made another point that in games you can change everything, like the differential, the preload, the anti-roll bars, and how in real life as a pro driver you get like a max 5 laps to change your setup, which is kind of interesting. And then you mentioned your like we talked about before, your 2 times 2-class winner at Spa, but you're bad at Spa in a sim. So why do you think that is? You mentioned that.
good question. And actually, last night I was playing Spa on Gran Turismo.
Oh yeah, because it's new, isn't it? So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I was like a second off, and I don't know. I think that what do I think? I was thinking like why am I slower in the game? And I don't know. I mean, when you race it in real life, you're scared of crashing. You're very alert. You're very awake. It feels very intense. And in the game, it's just the Spa in the game. I mean, okay, Sector 1 is a straight between La Source and Lecum. So Eau Rouge is not a corner in the game. And Sector 3 is a straight from Stavelot 2 all the way to the bus stop chicane and through Blanchimont. So those 2 sectors don't really matter. So it's not really a track that I how do I pronounce this? How do I say it right? It's not scary in the game. And
No.
I don't know. Maybe I don't know why, but I'm just guessing. Maybe I don't take it seriously enough to be quick in the game. And anyway, I prefer more technical tracks in general in simulators.
Yes.
Where you have brake inputs and stuff. And I don't know. I mean, I think I'm going to play Spa after this to do a track guide. And I think I'll find another half second. But I'm still going to be miles off the top guys. And I will never know why.
It's just different.
Yeah, it's different. It is.
Just different, yeah.
But look, full credit to Gran Turismo, by the way. I was expecting it to be worse, to be dead honest with you. Yes. And they've actually done a really, really good model of the track. And if you don't get the right apex through Eau Rouge, the way that you can feel the force feedback, the bouncing through the force feedback, and the way the car flexes, that's quite real. That feels to me realistic. And I just feel like, we don't have enough time, but sim racers just don't give Gran Turismo enough credit. Simple. No. They should, because they've done a really good job with Spa. And I just think they deserve a bit more credit for what they've done. And yes, iRacing and Assetto Corsa and R-Factor are very good. But I played R-Factor yesterday, and everyone says it's the best sim at the moment. And I was like, meh, I don't know. It feels like a simulator. That's about it. They all feel like games. And some of them get things right, some of them get things wrong.
Yeah.
Last night I was on iRacing, and I definitely there's this thing with snap oversteer where you land up facing backwards in the gravel, which just does not happen in real life. But the sim racing guys seem to think that that's realistic, but it's not. So they're all guilty of doing something wrong.
Yeah, exactly. I have notes here on the Sims and on the Sims. What was it you were driving in R Factor 2?
An LMP2 car, because my friend is going to be racing LMP2s for the first time. So I went to his house for a little bit of fun, and we used the LMP2. I can't remember which one it was. I think it was the Orica.
Yes,
and it was at Portimao.
Most probably, yeah.
It was at Portimao. It felt cool, but it just still felt like a game. He said it was realistic, though, by the way, because he's already tested the P2. And he said there were certain elements that the game was replicating which happened in real life. But there was other elements also. Like, we could, as hard as we could try, we really struggled to lock the brakes, and we had no ABS on. But in real life, it's much easier to lock up. And what was the other thing? When you're in like a long slide, like let's say you've lost the rear and you're trying to catch the rear. In real life, you'll tend to, once you've lost the rear in a P2 or any sort of mid-engine car, it's almost impossible to catch. You're almost gone. You're gone for good. And you what you're trying to do from there is minimize or maximize rather the slide so that you're facing the right direction by the end of it. But in R Factor, it's much easier to catch. And yes, we had all the assists off to anyone who's listening. We had it set to racing driver spec. And so there was certain elements. There's certain elements in all the games, by the way. They all get some things right, but they also get some things wrong. The way I explain it is if you could imagine this world, our planet, with 98% gravity, okay, that we're compared to what we have now. Everything would look the same, right? It would look similar, but there would be a difference. Like people would be a little bit taller. Or let's say 99.8% gravity. Everyone would be a little bit taller. The leaves would fall off the tree a little bit slower. Balls would bounce just a little bit higher. So it looks and feels like the real world, but there's something not right.
Something's missing. Yeah.
That's simulators.
Good analogy. Yeah. And you talked about how, for example, turn one at Suzuka is the same in sims as in real life, but often sims don't get the curbs on the S's correctly. So which I can appreciate. And something I noted, you talked about how you use the bumper cam in GT Sport, and that's the field of view. That's the view you like. and people commented. I think you used an expression, field of view prima donnas, which made me laugh. But like I'm the same. I don't really care. Like because you have single screen, triple screen, wide aspect ratio. You have VR. Like you use whatever makes you feel happy and makes you feel content in the car. And you talked about people commenting on your field of view in iRacing, and you said, well, basically that's what I see when I'm in the real car, when I'm driving the Ferrari 488 GT3. So I thought that was very interesting.
Mate, I have never in my life I find it so utterly, like, it's bizarre and ridiculous. I didn't expect that when I posted a video of iRacing that people would complain about my view, the choice of view. It's like, guys, race with what you're comfortable with. And then they say, no, technically you're wrong because this is what you should see. And I say to them, no, I know exactly what I see. And that's what I've set it to in the game. So I just...
Yeah, exactly.
I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to say that the screen is a window to the world. Okay. And you must set that window to have the right aspect ratio, as if you could see a sign right in front of you. How big would that sign look in front of you in real life? Okay, that's how big it must look in the game, and that's how you set up your field of view. I understand. But 90% of these guys set up their field of view accordingly, and they're basically sitting on the dashboard with their nose touching the windscreen. And I'm like, guys, if you sat in a real car, a GT car, you can't touch the dashboard with your hand. If you sit in the way that you're meant to sit and you reach out, you can't touch the dashboard. And that's how I set my screen up to be as if I was looking at myself in the car. I don't set it to be a window to the world. And that's what I like. And I've driven like that in all simulators for as long as I can remember. And it's fun. It feels, to me, that's more immersive. Whereas in Gran Turismo, the reason I don't use the dashboard view is you can't see anything.
No,
so,
and you can't change it, isn't it? So I don't have a PlayStation. You can't change it anyway, so you need to use bumper cam. So
you can't see anything in Gran Turismo with the dashboard view, which is a shame because I love seeing the interiors of these cars. I really, really love seeing the modeling of the interiors. That comes from like a video game background, and I appreciate the time and effort that the interior designers use. I mean, Assetto Corsa went to so much effort to get these interiors right, and they spoke to me a lot about all the switches and the numbers on the dash and what they represent. And I love looking at that stuff, even, so that's how I set up my field of view. And I would love to do a meme video about if I was a sim racer in the real world, how would my seat position look? And just basically
Yeah.
move the seat all the way up to the steering wheel. Take off the steering wheel, by the way, because they also don't like seeing the steering wheel in the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, take a
Yeah.
photo of that. So getting to do it, I have to do it. I'm gonna next time I'm near a racing car.
Actually, the only thing I do is I usually turn off the hands, the simulated hands, because I like looking at the wheel. So that's the thing. Because if somebody has a detailed version, if somebody has a detailed replica of a Ferrari or a Porsche or a Bentley or a BMW wheel, I like to see the wheel. So, and you talked about back to your chat with Zach again, but how you mentioned commenting to the guys from Kunos about the Ferrari, the details on the dash in Assetto Corsa Competizione, and then you said that you noted to them that the curbs in Zandvoort were missing, and then they fixed it like straight away, which is impressive.
Oh, it's surreal. I was like, holy.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
No problem. Yeah.
I just had an influence on a game, like quite a clear influence on how a game is going to be played by people, and they changed the curbs. So that was awesome. But I have a Discord channel with them, and we speak not all the time, but whenever I play the game, I drop some feedback in there.
Which is a good idea, yeah. And then I guess a final note: if you have these field of view prima donnas with the arc of the steering wheel filling half the screen, and then they're unlike you, they can't go into Assetto Corsa Competizione and drive as themselves in a Ferrari 488 GT3. So I think that says it all. And there you were, like playing Assetto Corsa Competizione and driving as yourself, and that must be a nice feeling. So
it's completely strange, man. It's completely strange.
Completely bizarre, yeah.
Yeah.
Bizarre. Yeah.
Because I promise you, I'm a gamer. I'm just a casual gamer like everyone else. I promise you. And then to see suddenly my name in a game is ridiculous.
Yeah. Exactly. That must be a lovely feeling to have worked so far, and a way come full circle, if you will. And there you are. You're David. There's David Perel in as a selectable menu option in a video game. That must be bizarre.
It's bizarre.
I have notes here, so much more notes, so many things I wanted to talk about. We're already over time, and I guess we could maybe talk some other day. But the current state of motorsport, I mean, it's changing now. You have electrical vehicles. There are electric series coming on, and you have, of course, internal combustion engine racing still, and then you have the World Endurance Championship. You talked about this with Zach, for example, how LMP1 is kind of falling apart, and it's a bit of embarrassing in terms of their balance of performance, and the same for GTE, and then how can Blancpain get BOP right, balance of performance, when the World Endurance Championship can't. So what's your feeling right now, if it's kind of an overall question in terms of electric versus internal combustion? And maybe something that had occurred to me as I was writing notes for this: do you see a point where the GT3 class could potentially become hybrid in the future?
I know that at least for the next 5 years there's no hybrid plans. I hope not, because the car is already quite heavy, so they'll just go heavier. I have no problem with Formula E, for example. I really enjoy watching Formula E. I look forward to it. I do prefer the sound of an engine, but if you watch an ELMS race live, trust me, those LMP2 engines, they're so loud that after 20 minutes, you're looking for headphones to block out the sound.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
That's not saying that I don't like engine sound. I love engine sound. I send my brother videos of V12s all the time. But I have no problem with electric racing coming in. Where I think there's a mismatch, though, is like there's going to be Rallycross is going to be electric soon, and I think that's a mismatch.
Yeah.
But
so
I can understand it with Formula racing, because Formula racing is meant to be a pinnacle of technology in terms of cars. So it makes sense there. I think it's overcomplicated in Formula One. We don't need the batteries there. I would love it if F1 was lighter. They're about 150 kilograms too heavy now. But this current state of motorsports, okay, so I think we're at the top of a bubble now, especially in the financial world. There's too many GT championships in the world. And I'm a bit worried, not because of the style of racing. I think GT racing has got the formula spot on. I'm just concerned about the economy and how it's going to affect GT racing in the next 2 to 3 years. So
yeah, indeed. Yeah.
That to me is a concern at the moment. I like the new rules of the F1. I like what Liberty has done with F1. I know there's a lot of critics about how they've handled F1. I think they've handled it brilliantly. They've invested money in it. They finally brought F1 racing to our phones so we can watch it on our laptop. I mean, in our browsers and stuff, as opposed to trying to find a TV channel somewhere to chat it on. They've done good things with social media. I'm a huge Formula One fan, by the way. I love Formula One. But that's a podcast on its own. But yeah, I'm just concerned about WEC still, WEC and ELMS. ELMS is healthy, but WEC still has its problems. I think there's like 9 LMP2s, 9 GTEs, and 7 or 6 LMP1s. So that's a big problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The P1s is over now, so the hypercars are coming next year, but there's only 2 manufacturers involved so far. Ferrari said they don't want to get involved. I honestly think they should have just taken GTE and given them more power. That's honestly what I think they should have done.
Good point. Yeah.
Instead, they've created this new complex category. Some will be hybrids, some won't be hybrids. It's clear as day. It's very clear to me that they cannot get the balance of performance right. They keep adding weight to the Toyotas. The Toyotas keep pulling away. And I don't see how they're going to get that right with the hypercars. The reason the SRO gets so good with GT3s is because the SRO has 2 dedicated test drivers who drive each car, and then they set the BOP based on that, so that the manufacturers can't hide their performance. Whereas in WEC, they use this dynamic BOP system, which it's a formula, and they adjust it accordingly, and it's random, in my opinion. As much as I say it's orderly, it's actually random, in my opinion, because if you look at Le Mans this year, Aston Martin struggled in testing. Okay, then they got pole position by less than 1/10 of a second. And then they got this massive BOP hit, which put them completely out of contention before the race. And it was done dynamically with their formula, with their system. And it's just a shame. So I don't know how they're going to manage the hypercars, honestly.
Yeah, interesting. And then dynamically, do you mean, is it like programming inside the ECU, or how does it actually function?
Well, it's
interesting.
It's a case of adjusting the boost levels and the weight.
Yeah. Okay.
And then they look at your sector times. They don't look at lap times, because you can hide your lap times, but you can't really hide your sectors. So they look at things like top speed. They look at sectors, and they go off that. And that's how they do it.
Interesting. And I know that I did note that you, when you talk about Zach, you said how the SRO for the GT3, they have a pair or so of drivers who basically go across and race all the brands, or test all the brands rather, which seems to be the way to go. And of course, as you and Zach noted, you have a Bentley matching up with, which is like the big tank, matching up with the other cars, which of course is interesting. But
it's
it works.
Phenomenal. Yeah. It's phenomenal.
But it works. And in terms of your sim racing gear, now you had a rig overview, and you have Thrustmaster like I do, but you have the TGT, which is the specialist rim or base rather for GT Sport, and it has that kind of subwoofer thing on the back of it, which is only used by Gran Turismo Sport, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
The TGT base. I have the TSPC, which is the origin of that. I bought it secondhand from a guy in Scotland. Long story. And you have a Sparco rig, and you also have the Thrustmaster pedals. But you said you'd like to invest in a load cell brake at some point, which many people also talk about. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So, yeah, I've told Thrustmaster before I joined them that I think their pedals need work, and I do believe that they're working on pedals. They just haven't told me yet. But yeah, I'm hoping, because I think their wheelbase cost to benefit ratio is the best belt-driven wheel on the market. Okay,
yeah, it's expensive
I own,
though. Yeah.
yeah, but if you compare it to a Fanatec wheel, which is more expensive, so that at that level, because after that you're talking multiple thousands of euros for a belt-driven wheel or a direct drive wheel, which is good.
Yeah.
So I really like the TGT, but I've told them that the pedals need work, and I hope that they're going to make an upgrade there. Yeah, but I like to keep things simple. Prior to this, I played on my office desk with a rotating office chair, and
that's what I'm doing right now. Actually, yeah. Funnily enough,
and it was more than fine, and that's what I love about sim racing. All these toys, which I now have, you don't need these toys to be fast. You do not need these toys to be fast, and they're just toys. They're really nice to have. They're very, very nice to have. But at the end of the day, if you want to go fast, that's not a requirement.
And in relation to Thrustmaster specifically, are you using the mod for the pedal that comes in the box? Have you installed that?
I installed it and then I took it off.
Okay, the conical brake mod. Interesting.
Yeah. It didn't feel right.
Okay, it feels too short, because I noticed that every time I turn on the PC, like booting from cold, I have to kind of press the pedal all the way to kind of calibrate it inside the driver to make sure that the travel of the pedal is properly detected, because I am using the brake pedal mod that comes in the box. And you, from your Patreon supporters, you're able to get a new gaming PC, and you've also used VR as well. So how many titles have you used VR for, and what did you think?
I've used VR in Assetto Corsa Competizione, iRacing, and R Factor, but not at my house. I use them at real life simulator. At more professional simulators. Yeah, and it's very cool. It's very immersive. If I had the money, well, I probably could afford it, but I don't think it's necessary. Again, to me, the bells and whistles are not the be all and end all.
No.
So, what do I say about it? I love VR. I mean, every time I put it on, I'm like, oh my god, like I'm in a racing car right now. So that's cool, that's very cool. But it's, I mean, this is another thing. People say, oh, David, you need triple screens and you need VR. It's like, oh, I actually don't need any of those things, but they are cool.
Yeah, nice to have. Yeah,
very nice to have. And it does actually, it improves the perception of the racetrack, It makes the racetrack feel a bit scary, a bit tighter and all that. And the interior is awesome when you have the VR. So that's all pretty cool. But I don't plan on buying a VR set anytime soon. I'm actually more interested in a better TV, because at the moment I'm using a small monitor, which is not the best. Actually, I'm going to Google that after this thing to look at it. I want a curved display. That's my next.
Yeah, I was just going to say it. And I mentioned it to Neil Tuskenveld when he was on, that 34-inch monitor seems to be the way to go. Although Neil's mentioned you might sacrifice field of view a little bit, because obviously, the field of view, the aspect ratio, of course, depends on the physical device you're actually using, be it VR or triples or singles or wide aspect ratio. But based on the field of view that you use, and even I think a 35-inch wide aspect ratio monitor seems to be the way to go, and you would also get more desktop space when you're using the computer as a rule. So that seems to be the way to go. Yeah,
indeed, for sure.
Indeed. Now we'll finish up. We've been talking for 2 hours, David, and we could talk more. And I have so many notes and so many things I wanted to ask you, but I don't want to keep you. And now, in terms of your kind of you talked about you are an interface designer and your use of Adobe Illustrator. Are you still doing that on the about page of your YouTube channel? You have a WordPress theme company. There's references to layers for WordPress using Elementor. So are you still working on that on some level with your brother, or?
Not really. My brother mostly does that stuff still, but I'm never at home, so I just don't have the time that to look after a business. You need full-time attention and all that.
Of course, yeah.
And yeah, it's just I don't miss WordPress, to be honest with you. I really, it was really stressful to build a company in that industry, and very difficult. And the customers are very demanding because you give away stuff for free, and the people who want stuff for free are the most demanding.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But I still do HTML and CSS stuff to stay sharp.
Yeah.
I can still cut up a page. That's what we call it, a design rather, into a page. And I still do that. My own website was done by me.
I thought so. Yeah.
And I have a passion for web design, so I still keep on tabs on that stuff. But I'm very much disconnected from that industry, and my brother contacts me if he needs help with some CSS code. But that's about it. Markup. Some people say CSS isn't code. It is code, but
it is code. It is
technically markup. But anyway,
it's almost like object-oriented code. And actually, one question I had here, if I may, and I guess you doing your YouTube content with your your onboards and so on, and maybe doing vlogs with a gimbal and making your own website. In terms of your technical knowledge, and then back to, for example, McKinney Rinaldi, like not even replying to emails, and if he replies, sending an SMS. And I guess I'm thinking of Nikki Team as well, who streams and stuff. So you and Nikki, in terms of professional drivers, let's say in the silver, gold, and platinum, are you guys the technical guys? Are you guys the exception? Are you amongst the crowd? Or I mean, are many of the drivers are they tech savvy, or would you, is that maybe it's I guess the point I'm trying to make was, are guys like you and Nikki Team, do you kind of break the mold in terms of the kind of the social media engagement of social media that you do? I mean, so many guys of course have Instagram, but they don't do the full gamut. Maybe they don't design their own presence, they don't do their own videos and so on. If you am I making any sense?
yeah. No, I mean, my guys, my friends at the racetrack, they tease me a little bit for the onboard stories, and I pray to God that my real racing driver friends don't watch them, but they do. But no, we are one in a few. Most racing drivers couldn't be bothered. And I just do it because I have a passion for sim racing and real racing, and I want to connect the dots.
Yes, of course, yeah.
And I mean, look, my web business was built initially off a video blog, so I kind of have a history with creating videos, not well produced ones, but putting something that people watch is. I've done it before, and I just wanted to continue doing it. But it seems that we're the only ones who could be bothered. And I'm surprised that my team let me post some of the videos I do post. Like, I'm not allowed to post the GTE stuff, for example. And And
I noticed you mentioned that. So sorry. Some of the onboards you're either not allowed to post at all, or like the most recent video, you had to wait until you could actually post it.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. Yeah.
So
I wasn't aware of that. Yeah.
The onboard stories could stop at any moment, which is a shame. But for the meanwhile, I post them.
You make them while you can. Yeah.
I can. I enjoy making them. I enjoy the comments. I try to reply to all the comments. It's getting more and more difficult, to be honest. But I enjoy the comments. I enjoy the interaction. And it's fun. It's fun to show people what I do. And, the people in the racing world don't care. Like, I wouldn't be able to send one of my onboards to to a team manager and be like, hey, look how good I am. He wouldn't bother with that.
No. It would mean nothing to him as such, maybe.
Pretty much. They're not looking for how fast you are, by the way. I mean, we need another hour to explain that, but they're looking for a professional driver, which is not the fastest driver. But it's nice to share, because I know that, at least with the onboard stories, I know no one else is doing it, which is shocking. I mean, YouTube is huge, but I know no one else is doing that in the racing world. So I've managed to find a niche for now. I know it will be filled
Yeah.
up, but for now I got a little bit of a niche, and it's cool.
Yeah. And I guess it's your personality that shines through, and one of the reasons why you do it. And I guess it's the same for Nicky Thiem as well. Nicky has his own approach to things,
He's
which
great.
people engage with, and it's the same for you. Now and then we'll try and wrap up. We'll be here for the whole day. Do you want to plug? What have you got now? You have your online store, and I'll have all the links in the podcast description. I'll just use the links that you have in your own videos with the little emojis. I like the way you put the links together, so that looks really cool. So you have your online store, you have Coach Dave, you have your Patreon. So is there something you want to plug in terms of those, in terms of events you have coming up, in terms of videos you have coming up in the future?
So shop.davidperel.net is my where you can buy some t-shirts and caps and stuff. Then if you want to get coached by me, I have if you go davidperel.net/coaching, I coach sim races and some real races I use Assetto Corsa or Gran Turismo or iRacing, whatever you want really. And it's like an hour of coaching there, which is cool. And what else? I'm racing at the end of the month in South Africa, Kyalami 9 Hour. You can watch it on youtube.com/GT World. Look out for the 333 green Ferrari. I almost said red Ferrari. And then I do the Golf 12 Hour. That's in December, but that's quite far away. But anyway, I mean, if you follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/DavePerel, then you'll find out all my latest stuff. And please subscribe to my YouTube channel because I post cool stuff there. And thank you for listening to this podcast. I appreciate it.
Indeed, and thank you very much for joining. So we'll call it a day. And David, thank you very much for joining the show. I look forward to putting this online, and I think it's been a great discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to everyone who's been listening. I know it was a long one, but I hope you found it interesting, and look forward to more in the future. Thanks so much.
Yes, please God. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Is that the outro music? Do 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 do.